Returning home 2 days early from my close friend's funeral, due to a sudden blizzard, I planned to surprise my wife. But as I turned onto our street, I caught sight of the attic window, the light flickered on, and was instantly switched off with deliberate haste. She was supposed to be at the hospital, sitting by her dying mother's bedside. Sensing something terribly wrong, I pulled over and watched in silence. Exactly 15 minutes later, the front door swung open. Seeing the figure stepping out of my own home, I froze in absolute shock. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please comment on your city or country below, so we can connect. Quick note, this story includes fictional elements shaped for entertainment and reflection. Any similarity to names or settings is completely accidental, but the core message I am conveying to you is vital. I was supposed to be in New York for 4 more days. The funeral had been on Monday, a quiet graveside service for Gerald Hoffman, my oldest friend from college, a man who had spent 40 years teaching high school history in Brooklyn and never once complained about anything. Gerald would have hated the flowers his daughter chose. He would have loved the cold. He always said a man ought to be buried in weather that meant something. I stayed through Monday night and into Tuesday morning, helping his daughter sort through boxes of books in his apartment on West 84th Street. We stacked them by subject, the way Gerald would have wanted history together, biography together, everything else in a separate pile for the library donation. It was the kind of work that kept your hands busy while your chest quietly fell apart. Then the weather changed everything. The storm system hit the northeast coast earlier than forecasted 16 inches of snow, already burying LaGuardia by Tuesday afternoon, with more coming before midnight. My return flight was canceled before I even reached the terminal. I rebooked on the last available seat to Fresno, a routing through Dallas that got me wheels down at Fresno Yosemite International just after 4 in the afternoon. I texted Diane from the plane that I would pick up something to eat and be home before 6. She replied with a single heart. The drive from the airport to our neighborhood in Clovis takes 23 minutes in ordinary traffic. I know because I have made it hundreds of times over the past 18 years, from library board meetings that ran late from holiday shopping trips to the Fig Garden Village Mall from the airport after every conference and vacation and work trip that has punctuated the quiet rhythm of our life together. 23 minutes of Central Valley sky, wide and flat and indifferent, the kind of sky that makes you feel both very small and very settled at the same time. I turned onto our street at 4:32. Our house sits at the far end of Ridgecrest Drive, a 2-story Craftsman with a detached garage and a gabled attic room that Diane converted into her home office 8 years ago. The attic faces the street. In the late afternoon, when the California winter sun drops low and warm, the west-facing window catches the light in a particular way that makes the room glow even when the overhead fixture is off. The overhead fixture was on. I noticed it the way you notice something familiar that is shifted slightly out of place, the way a librarian notices a book returned to the wrong shelf. Not alarm, not fear. Just a small wrongness that snagged at the back of my mind. Diane was supposed to be at St. Agnes Medical Center. Her mother, Patricia, had been admitted 4 days earlier with congestive heart failure, and Diane had barely left her bedside. She had called me in New York both mornings, voice low and exhausted, describing the numbers on the monitors. The things the nurses said, the way her mother's hands felt cold even under 3 blankets. There was no reason for Diane to be home, no reason for that light to be burning. Then in the space of one breath, it went dark. Not dimmed, not flickered, switched off with the deliberateness of someone who had just remembered a reason to. I did not pull into the driveway. I am not certain I made a conscious decision. My hands simply eased the wheel to the right, and I rolled the car quietly to the curb, 2 houses down behind the Patterson's oak tree, and stopped. I turned off the engine. I sat with my hands in my lap and watched the front of my house the way I used to watch the reference desk on slow afternoons, with patience, with the understanding that information arrives on its own schedule and cannot be rushed. 15 minutes passed. I counted them on the dashboard clock, each minute longer than the one before. A neighbor walked a retriever past my window without glancing in my direction. A UPS truck rumbled through and turned the corner. The streetlights ticked on one by one, casting the kind of amber glow that makes everything look slightly more ordinary than it is. Then the front door opened. Marcus Holt stepped onto the porch first. I had met Marcus exactly once 3 years earlier at a dinner party Diane hosted for what she called her old Fresno crowd, people from before our marriage names I half recognized from stories she had told over the years. Marcus had been pleasant, unremarkable. He worked in some kind of document services, Diane had said. I had shaken his hand, refilled his wine glass once, and forgotten him before the dishes were done. I remembered him now. He was carrying our luggage, not his own bag, not a box, but the brown leather weekender I had given Diane on our 10th anniversary, the one she kept on the high shelf in our closet and only brought down for overnight trips. He had it over one shoulder, full and heavy. In his other hand, he held a smaller zippered case that I recognized as the one Diane kept her mother's jewelry and pearl earrings, a gold brooch, a bracelet that had belonged to my own mother before she passed it to Diane at our wedding rehearsal dinner. My fingers closed around the steering wheel. Diane appeared in the doorway behind him. She was wearing the blue cardigan I had given her last Christmas. She reached out and adjusted the collar of Marcus's jacket, a slow, familiar gesture, the kind you make without thinking, the kind that lives in the muscle memory of a relationship. She said something I could not hear. Marcus smiled. He walked to a silver sedan parked at the curb. A car I did not recognize opened the trunk and set both bags inside with the careful ease of a man who had done this before. Diane watched him from the doorway until the trunk closed. Then she looked up and down the street. I did not move. I sat behind the Patterson's oak tree in a rental car with a Dallas layover sticker still on the window, watching my wife of 22 years scan the neighborhood to make sure no one was watching, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not rage, not grief, but something quieter and colder than either. Something that felt, if I am honest, like the specific stillness that comes when a question you have been afraid to ask finally answers itself. Marcus got into the sedan and drove away. Diane went back inside and closed the door. I sat there for another 3 minutes watching the attic window. The light did not come back on. I picked up my phone, looked at Diane's text, the single red heart she had sent from what I now understood was this house not the hospital, and set the phone face down on the passenger seat. Then I started the engine and pulled into my own driveway. The front door opened into a house that smelled almost right. Almost. That was the word that stopped me in the entryway with my travel bag still in my hand. The living room looked exactly as I had left it 4 days ago. Throw pillows squared on the couch, Gerald's memorial program still on the coffee table, where I had set it before. The taxi came Monday morning, the kitchen light on low, the way Diane always left it when she expected to be home after dark. Everything was where it belonged. Everything smelled like home, except for one thin thread running underneath it all. Something floral and faintly sweet, a perfume I did not recognize, sitting just below the surface of the familiar, like a word written in pencil beneath ink. I set my bag down at the foot of the stairs and walked to the kitchen. 2 wine glasses stood upside down in the drying rack beside the sink. Diane did not drink wine on weekday afternoons. I knew this the way I knew which library patrons preferred large print editions and which ones always returned books 2 weeks late through years of quiet, unspoken observation. We kept a bottle of Napa Cabernet on the counter for weekends. It was gone. In its place sat the empty bottle rinsed clean, already destined for the recycling bin. Someone had been thorough. I opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and stood at the kitchen island for a long moment. I was aware of my own breathing, slow and even. A man who has spent 18 years managing a public library learns early that the worst thing you can do in a crisis is let your face tell the room what your mind is doing. I went upstairs. The bedroom door was open. The bed had been made, sheets pulled tight, comforter smoothed, flat decorative pillows, arranged in the precise order Diane maintained, with a consistency I had always quietly admired. But the left pillow sat a half-inch higher than the right. Diane was left-handed. She always smoothed her side, first then crossed to mine. Someone had done it in reverse. Someone who knew enough to try, but not enough to get it exactly right. I opened the closet. Our jewelry box sat on the upper shelf, a flat rosewood case my mother had passed to Diane the night before our wedding rehearsal dinner, pressing it into her hands with both of hers and saying without any ceremony, "These are for keeping." Inside were my mother's pearl earrings, a gold brooch she had worn to every Christmas Eve service for 30 years, and a thin gold bracelet engraved with a date I still knew by heart. The bracelet was gone. I stood with my hand on the closet door and felt something move through me that I could not name precisely. Not grief, not anger, something older and quieter, the way a tree must feel when it registers through its roots that the soil underneath has shifted. I heard the front door open downstairs. "Walter!" Diane's voice came up the stairwell, startled and bright. "Oh my God, you're home." Her footsteps were fast on the stairs. She appeared in the bedroom doorway still wearing her coat, her eyes red-rimmed in the way they got when she had been crying, her hair pulled back loosely the way she wore it at the hospital. She crossed the room in 4 steps and wrapped both arms around me so tightly that I felt her exhale against my shoulder. "I missed you so much," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "Mom had a better afternoon. The nurses said she stabilized, so I ran home to shower and change before the night shift starts." She pulled back and looked at my face with an expression of such complete relief that I felt for one disorienting second the full weight of 22 years press against my chest. "Why didn't you call me? I would have come straight home." "I wanted to surprise you," I said. I put my arms around her and held her the way I had held her 10,000 times, before my chin resting on the top of her head. My eyes open looking at the closet shelf where my mother's bracelet was no longer sitting. "I'm so glad you're back," she whispered. "I've been so scared being here alone." "I know," I said. "I know you have." We stood like that for a moment, longer than felt natural. Then she pulled back, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and managed a small, exhausted laugh. "Let me make you something to eat. You must be starving after that flight." "I'm fine," I told her. "Go back to your mother. I'll be here when you get home." She searched my face quickly the way a person does when they are checking for something specific, and then she nodded, squeezed my hand, and went back downstairs. I listened to the sounds of her moving through the kitchen, below the tap, running briefly, her keys lifting from the hook by the door. The front door opened and closed. The house went quiet. I walked down the hall to the small room I used as a home office. The filing cabinet beside the desk had 4 drawers. I opened the second one from the bottom, the one where I kept property documents, mortgage statements, insurance records, anything that pertained to the house itself. The hanging folders were all in place, labeled in the neat block letters I had used since the year we bought this house. The folder marked Home Equity was there, but it was empty. The label remained. The folder remained. Everything inside it, the original loan documents, the deed of trust, the appraisal records from 2019, was gone, removed cleanly without disturbing anything around it by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. I closed the drawer. I went back to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water I did not drink, and stood at the window looking out at Ridgecrest Drive. The silver sedan Marcus had driven away in was long gone. The street was quiet and ordinary in the way that streets are quiet and ordinary when something irreversible has already happened, and the neighborhood simply has not been informed yet. I picked up my phone. I looked at Cousin Paul's number for a long moment. Then I set the phone down and went to bed. I did not sleep. I made coffee at 5:47 in the morning because there was nothing else useful I could do. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove. I stood at the counter and listened to the coffee maker work and tried to arrange what I knew into something that resembled a coherent picture. The folder was gone. The bracelet was gone. Marcus Holt had walked out of my house carrying luggage that belonged to my wife. Diane had come home, held me, and looked me in the eye without flinching once. I poured the coffee and sat down at the kitchen table where we had eaten 10,000 breakfasts together. I had met Diane Calloway in the spring of 2003, 14 months after the worst year of my life. In early 2002, I had been running a small document digitization business out of a leased office space on Blackstone Avenue. 3 employees, a modest client list, and a loan I had taken against everything I owned to buy the equipment that was supposed to grow it into something real. My business partner at the time was a man named Marcus Holt. We had met through a mutual contact at the Fresno Chamber of Commerce, and for 18 months he had been the most capable, most reliable person I had ever worked alongside. Then he emptied the operating account and vanished. $41,000, gone in 2 wire transfers over a single weekend while I was attending a conference in Sacramento. By Monday morning, there was nothing left to pay the lease, nothing left to pay my employees, and nothing left to service the loan. I spent 6 months trying to recover what I could. I could not recover any of it. I filed for bankruptcy protection in November of 2002 and moved into a studio apartment on the east side of Fresno that cost $450 a month. Diane appeared in March of 2003. She was a friend of a friend introduced at a dinner party hosted by colleagues from the community college where I had taken a part-time administrative position to keep myself afloat. She was warm and funny and practical in a way that felt like oxygen after a year of drowning. 3 weeks after we met, she told me she had some money set aside inheritance from an aunt, she said, and that she wanted to invest it in helping me get back on my feet. I told her I could not accept it. She told me it was not charity, it was belief. We argued about it for 2 weeks. Then I accepted it. We were engaged 8 months later. Now, sitting at the kitchen table in the gray December morning, I thought about the sequence of events with the deliberate patient attention I gave to cataloging damaged archive materials at the library, the kind of attention that does not rush toward conclusions but simply notes what is there. Marcus Holt had destroyed my business in 2002. Diane had arrived in 2003 with money to rebuild it. I picked up my coffee cup and set it down without drinking. I thought about the things I had noticed over the past 8 months and chosen not to examine too closely. Diane's phone, always face up on the kitchen counter for the first 15 years of our marriage, had begun spending its evenings face down on the end table beside the couch. Her schedule, once as predictable as a tide chart, had developed a new irregularity: client meetings that ran past 9 o'clock Saturday morning appointments. With a gym I had never visited, a weekend conference in Monterey last September that she had mentioned only 4 days before she left. Once in July, I had asked who she was texting at midnight. She had put the phone down, looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something between exhaustion and contempt, and said, "Walter, I am 58 years old. I am not a teenager sneaking around behind your back. If you cannot trust me after 22 years, then I honestly do not know what to tell you." Her voice had cracked on the last sentence. She had gone to bed without another word. I apologized the next morning. I apologized. I stood up, rinsed my coffee cup, and placed it in the drying rack beside the 2 wine glasses that were no longer there. Then I walked down the hall to the entryway, took my coat from the hook, and sat on the bottom stair with my phone in my hand. Cousin Paul answered on the second ring. Paul Gaines had spent 24 years as a paralegal at a family law firm in downtown Fresno, long enough to have seen, as he once told me, over Thanksgiving dinner, every variety of human dishonesty that the legal system had been designed to address. He was 52 years old, careful with words, and constitutionally incapable of panic. "It's early," he said. "I know." I told him everything: the attic light, Marcus, the wine glasses, the jewelry box, the empty folder, Diane's performance in the bedroom doorway. I spoke for 6 minutes without interruption, keeping my voice level, the way I read aloud to the Tuesday morning story group at the library, clearly, without dramatizing what did not need dramatizing. When I finished, Paul was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Write this name down," he said. "Thomas Reed. He's on Fulton Street, 3rd floor. Do not call Diane's people, do not contact your bank, and do not mention any of this to anyone at work." He paused. "And Walter, don't confront her. Not yet. Not until you know exactly what you're dealing with." "I wasn't planning to," I said. Outside, the December morning was beginning to lighten over the rooftops of Ridgecrest Drive. Somewhere down the street, a car started. A dog barked twice and went quiet. The neighborhood was waking up the way it woke up every morning, without any awareness that anything had changed. I wrote down the name Thomas Reed on the back of a grocery receipt and put it in my shirt pocket. Then I heard Diane's key in the front door. Diane came through the door, carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent the night in a hospital chair. Her coat was wrinkled across the shoulders. Her eyes were swollen in a way that looked entirely real, the kind of swelling that comes from hours of fluorescent lighting, and institutional coffee, and the specific grief of watching a parent diminish. She set her purse on the entryway table, looked at me standing in the hall in my coat, and said, "You're up early?" "Couldn't sleep," I said. "How's Patricia?" "The same." She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. "The night resident thinks maybe another week, maybe less." She looked at my coat again. "Are you going somewhere?" "Library," I said. "Coverage issue. Someone called in sick." She accepted this the way she accepted most things I told her, without question, without particular interest, with the mild nod of a woman who had her own concerns occupying the available space in her mind. She went upstairs. I listened to the bedroom door close and stood in the entryway for a moment longer than necessary. Then I got in my car and drove to Fulton Street. Thomas Reed's office occupied the 3rd floor of a narrow brick building, 2 blocks from the Fresno County Courthouse, the kind of building that had been downtown since before the freeways came through, and had outlasted 3 rounds of urban renewal by the simple virtue of being too solid to demolish cheaply. The lobby smelled like old carpet and copy toner. The elevator was slow. I took the stairs. Reed himself was not what I had expected from Paul's recommendation. He was 54 years old, lean with close-cropped gray hair, and the unhurried manner of a man who had long ago stopped being surprised by what people were capable of doing to one another. His desk held 2 neat stacks of folders, a yellow legal pad, and a coffee mug that said Fresno State across the side in faded letters. He stood when I came in, shook my hand with a firm, brief grip, and gestured to the chair across from him. "Paul called ahead," he said. "Tell me everything in the order it happened." I told him. He wrote on the legal pad in small economical strokes, not looking up, not interrupting. When I finished, he set his pen down, turned the pad face down on the desk, and looked at me directly. "In the past 12 months," he said, "did your wife ask you to sign any documents? Anything she brought to you, insurance forms, financial paperwork, anything with your name on a signature line?" I opened my mouth to say no, and then I remembered March. It had been a Thursday evening, the kind of unremarkable Thursday that exists only as a blur in memory until something forces you to reconstruct it precisely. I had come home from the library later than usual, a staff meeting that ran 40 minutes over schedule, to find dinner already on the table and Diane sitting across from it with a thick manila envelope. Noah had been running a fever for 3 days. I had been managing his medication schedule, the school absence forms, the calls to his pediatrician, on top of a full work week. I was tired in the specific way that accumulates when you are doing 2 people's worth of worrying. Diane had set the envelope beside my plate and said, "I've been meaning to do this for months. Health insurance renewal for all 4 of us. The broker needs signatures on the new plan documents before the end of the month." She had fanned out the papers dense with the small print language that insurance companies use to describe what they would and would not cover. I had signed where she pointed. I had not read every page. March. I said to Reed, "Health insurance renewal." She brought me a stack of documents. I signed several pages. Reed did not change expression. He picked up his pen again. "Do you still have a copy of what you signed?" She handled everything. She said she'd file the copies. He wrote something on the pad. "I want you to request your credit reports from all 3 bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. You can do it online tonight. Do not contact your bank directly yet. Do not mention any of this to Diane." He paused. "One more question. Do you know what Marcus Holt does, professionally? His current occupation?" Diane said document services years ago. I never looked further into it. Reed set his pen down a second time. "Marcus Holt has held a notary public commission in Fresno County for the past 11 years. I heard the words clearly. It took me a moment to understand what they meant. A notary public in California is a state-commissioned official authorized to witness signatures on legal documents, verify the identity of signatories, and certify that paperwork has been properly executed. Without a notary's seal, certain documents, deeds of trust, loan agreements, powers of attorney cannot be recorded with the county or accepted by a financial institution. With one, they carry the legal presumption of authenticity. Marcus Holt could make any document Diane put in front of him look like something I had willingly signed in his presence. The room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. "That doesn't prove anything by itself," Reed said, watching my face. "But it tells us where to start." He slid a business card across the desk. "Call me before you do anything, before you sign anything, before you respond to anything Diane brings you. Are we clear?" "We're clear," I said. I drove home in the middle of the lunch hour, parked in the driveway, and sat for a moment before going inside. Diane was in the kitchen when I came through the door, standing at the counter eating toast over the sink the way she did when she was too tired to sit down properly. "How was the coverage issue?" she asked without turning around. "Resolved," I said. She nodded, finished her toast, and rinsed her plate. "I'm going back to the hospital at 3. Will you be okay with Noah after school?" "Of course," I said. She went upstairs to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Thomas Reed's business card in my hand and thought about 12 pages of insurance documents I had signed on a Thursday in March without reading every line. In 22 years of marriage, I had never lied to my wife. That morning, I had lied to her twice before 9 o'clock. Ray Morales did not have a waiting room. His office was a single room on the second floor of a converted house on Van Ness Avenue, 4 blocks from the library where I had worked for 18 years. The building had once been a dental practice. You could still see the faint outline on the wall where the reception window had been. Ray had filled the space with two metal filing cabinets, a desk that looked like it had survived multiple office relocations, and a large corkboard covered in photographs and index cards connected by lengths of red string. He was 57 years old, broad across the shoulders, with close-cropped dark hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of face that had learned through long professional habit to give nothing away. He had spent 19 years with the Fresno Police Department, the last 6 in financial crimes, before retiring and opening the private practice. Thomas Reed had recommended him without elaboration, which I had already come to understand was Reed's highest form of endorsement. Ray did not stand when I came in. He looked up from the folder open on his desk, studied me for a moment, the way a man studies a document he is deciding whether to trust. And then he said, "Sit down, tell me what you have." I sat. I told him. He listened the way Reed had listened, without interrupting, without reacting. But where Reed wrote notes on a legal pad, Ray simply watched my face. When I finished, he opened a drawer, took out a blank intake form, and slid it across the desk. Vehicle description for both of them. Regular schedule as best you know it. Any addresses besides the house. Bank names if you have them. Credit cards she uses. He tapped the form once with one finger. The more specific, the faster I work. I filled out what I could. Diane's Lexus ES, Silver, California, plates the number I had memorized years ago, out of ordinary habit. Her Tuesday and Thursday afternoon appointments that had appeared 8 months ago and never been explained. The Wells Fargo branch on Shaw Avenue where we kept our joint checking. The name, Marcus Holt Notary, Public, Fresno County. When Ray read that last item, something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. "I know that name," he said. "Not personally, professionally." He folded the form and set it in the open drawer without elaborating. "Can you tell me what that means?" I asked. "It means I've seen his notary seal on documents before," Ray said. "In a different case, a case that's settled." He closed the drawer. "I'll know more in a week." I drove from Ray's office to the library, parked in my usual spot, in the employee lot on the north side of the building, and sat in the car for a moment before going in. The Fresno County Public Library on Mariposa Street was a building I had spent more hours inside than any other place on earth except the house on Ridgecrest Drive. I knew every squeaking floorboard, every section of shelving that ran half an inch out of plumb, every regular patron by name and reading preference, and the particular hour they tended to arrive. I went inside and worked a full shift because there was nothing else I could reasonably do. At 4:15, I was reshelving return materials in the 300 Social Sciences Law Economics when Noah's after-school program bus dropped him at the front entrance. He came in through the main doors the way he always did. On the 2 afternoons a week I had him with me at work, backpack hanging off one shoulder, shoes untied, despite the 3 conversations we had about this every single week, looking around the lobby until he found me and then raising one hand in a wave that was more acknowledgement than greeting. I waved back. He settled at his usual table in the children's section with his homework folder. I finished reshelving and came around to check on him 40 minutes later. His math worksheet was complete. His reading log was open beside it. And on top of his backpack, held down by his pencil case, was a drawing on pale blue construction paper, the kind his art teacher sent home every few weeks. 4 figures. A house behind them, 2-story with a peaked roof that resembled ours on Ridgecrest Drive. A woman with yellow hair that Noah had always used for Diane, regardless of the fact that her hair was actually brown. A small boy in red. A taller figure that was unmistakably meant to be me. Rectangular glasses, a book tucked under one arm. And a 4th figure standing between the yellow-haired woman and the small boy, drawn larger than the others, with a wide smile rendered in careful purple crayon. I did not recognize him from the drawing. 7-year-olds are not portraitists. But the composition told me everything the likeness could not. The 4th figure stood where a father stands. His hand was connected to Noah's hand by a thick purple line. "Who's this?" I asked, keeping my voice at the register I used for story time, easy, unhurried, as if the answer were a matter of mild curiosity. Noah looked up from his reading log. "That's Dad Mark," he said, and looked back down. I set the drawing carefully on top of his pencil case, exactly where I had found it. "Looks like a good drawing," I said. "Mom helped me with his hair," Noah said. I walked back to the reshelving cart and stood with both hands on the metal bar and breathed through my nose for a count of 10. The library moved around me, a woman checking out audiobooks at the front desk, Two teenagers at the computer terminals, the particular smell of paper and climate-controlled air that had been the backdrop of my working life for nearly 2 decades. My phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. Ray Morales. I stepped into the staff hallway before answering. "I have photographs," he said. "You need to see them before I describe them." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, my office." I said I would be there. I put the phone back in my pocket and stood in the hallway for a moment, looking through the narrow window in the staff door, at Noah still bent over his reading log at the children's table, his shoes still untied his purple crayon, resting on top of the drawing he had made of a family that did not include me where I was supposed to be. Ray was already at his desk when I arrived at 7:58. He had coffee waiting 2 mugs, black no ceremony, and a manila envelope sitting in the center of the desk between us, like something he had been careful not to open without me present. He pushed 1 mug toward me, left the envelope where it was, and said, "I'm going to show you these in order. Don't jump ahead." I said I understood. He opened the envelope and laid the photographs out one at a time, left to right, the way you lay out evidence rather than the way you lay out snapshots from a vacation. The first photograph showed Diane and Marcus outside the Wells Fargo branch on Shaw Avenue, the same branch where we kept our joint checking account. They were not holding hands. They were not standing close in any way that suggested romance. Diane held a leather portfolio under one arm. Marcus carried a briefcase I had never seen before. They were walking toward the entrance with the focused, purposeful stride of 2 people arriving for an appointment they had made in advance. The second photograph was taken outside a low office building on Fresno Street, a building whose glass door visible over Diane's shoulder carried the name of a title, an escrow company in vinyl lettering. Marcus was holding the door open. Diane was already halfway through it. Neither of them looked around. The third photograph showed them seated at a corner table, inside what appeared to be a small restaurant, the kind of lunch place that exists near courthouses and municipal offices, patronized by people who eat quickly and talk about paperwork. Their heads were bent toward each other over a spread of documents. A pen sat in Marcus's hand. Whatever they were reviewing it seriously. I looked at all 3 photographs for a long moment. "They're not having an affair," I said. "No," Ray said. "They're conducting business." He reached into the envelope and removed 1 final photograph. He placed it on the desk separately, slightly apart from the others, and said nothing. It was a close-range shot taken through a car window, slightly compressed by the zoom, but sharp enough to read. Marcus was standing beside Diane's Lexus in a parking structure I did not recognize. He was holding a large manila envelope thicker than the one Ray was using now, bulging with whatever was packed inside it. The front of the envelope faced the camera directly. Written on it in thick black marker in Marcus's handwriting block, letters deliberate and clear, were 2 words. Walter signed. I read them once, then twice, then a third time with the specific methodical attention of a man who has spent 18 years verifying that what a document says is actually what a document says. I had not signed anything knowingly, I was certain of that, and yet the words were there written with the confidence of someone recording a fact rather than a claim. I set the photograph down on the desk and picked up my coffee mug and held it with both hands. "I need to call Reed," I said. Ray was already dialing. We were in Reed's office on Fulton Street by 10:30. Reed had pulled a copy of our homeowner's insurance policy from the documents I had photographed in the fireproof safe, specifically the renewal packet from March, which Diane had filed in the household records cabinet before the home equity folder disappeared. He spread 3 pages on the conference table and set a magnifying glass beside them. "Look at the signature lines," he said. There were 4 of them across the 3 pages. My signature appeared on each one, the particular combination of the capital W and the looping G that I had written on checks and forms and library purchase orders for 40 years. But the 4th page tucked between the 3rd and a blank separator sheet was not an insurance renewal form. It was a limited power of attorney for real property transactions, a document granting Diane Marie Gaines the authority to execute loan agreements, deed transfers, and refinancing arrangements on behalf of Walter Gaines for a period of 12 months from the date of signing. My signature was on the line at the bottom, my real signature, written in my own hand. On a Thursday evening in March, when Noah had a fever and I was exhausted, Diane had set a stack of papers in front of me and said the insurance broker needed them before the end of the month. Reed let me look at it for as long as I needed to. Then he said carefully, This is not a forged signature, Walter. This is your signature on a document you signed without knowing what it authorized. In California, this is called fraud. In the factum, you were deceived about the nature of what you were signing. It does not make the document automatically void, but it gives us grounds to challenge it." He paused. "It also means the HELOC may have been opened legally from the bank's perspective using this authorization." "Which means what?" I asked. "It means we cannot simply report fraud and have it reversed overnight. We need to document the deception itself." He folded his hands on the table. "I need you to pull your credit reports tonight, all 3 bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. Do not tell Diane. Do not change your behavior at home in any way that might signal to her that something has changed." He looked at me steadily. "Can you do that?" 22 years ago, I had signed my name on a marriage license in the Fresno County Clerk's office with the uncomplicated certainty of a man who believed he knew exactly what he was agreeing to. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." I pulled the reports after Noah went to bed. Diane was at the hospital. She had called at 7 to say Patricia had taken a difficult turn and she would stay through the night. I had made Noah macaroni and cheese from the blue box, his specific non-negotiable preference, supervised. His bath, read him 2 chapters of the book about the boy detective that we had been working through since October, and sat beside his bed until his breathing slowed and steadied into sleep. Then I went downstairs, opened my laptop at the kitchen table, and requested my credit reports from all 3 bureaus simultaneously through annualcreditreport.com, the federally mandated free service that every American consumer is entitled to use, which most people never think to check until something has already gone wrong. Equifax loaded first. I scrolled through the familiar accounts, the Wells Fargo joint checking the Visa card we had held since 2009, the auto loan on my Camry that I had paid off in 2022. All of it was exactly what I expected. Then I reached a line item I did not recognize. Account type, home equity line, of credit. Institution Central Valley Lending Group. Date opened March 14, 2025. Credit limit $250,000. Current balance $241,000. I read it 3 times. A home equity line of credit, commonly called a HELOC, is a revolving loan secured against the equity in a property. The lender calculates how much of the home's appraised value exceeds the existing mortgage balance and extends a credit line against that difference. Our house on Ridgecrest Drive had been appraised at $820,000 the previous spring. Our remaining mortgage balance was just under $200,000. That left more than $600,000 in equity, more than enough to secure the credit line Diane had opened, using the power of attorney I had signed without reading in March. Nearly $250,000 had been borrowed against my house. Nearly all of it was gone. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, without moving. The house made its ordinary nighttime sounds around me, the refrigerator cycling the heater, clicking on the particular creak from the 3rd stair that I had been meaning to fix for 2 years. Everything was exactly as it always was. I called Reed at 7:45 the following morning. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting in his conference room. Linda Marsh was already there. Reed introduced her as a forensic accountant, a specialist in financial fraud investigation, who had spent 11 years as an IRS field auditor before opening her private practice. She was 49 years old, precise in the way of someone who had trained herself to be precise as a professional requirement, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and a laptop open to a spreadsheet that already contained more data than I could parse at a glance. She did not look up when I sat down. She said, "I've been through what Thomas sent me this morning. Give me 10 more minutes." I gave her 10 minutes. She used 9 of them. "Your wife moved the HELOC funds in 6 separate transfers," she said, sliding a printed spreadsheet across the table toward me. Each transfer was under $50,000. That's not accidental federal bank reporting requirements, mandate automatic review for transactions over $10,000. But experienced financial fraudsters often stay well below that threshold to avoid pattern detection. 6 transfers under $50,000 triggers fewer flags than 1 transfer of $240,000. She tapped the spreadsheet with 1 finger. "The destination account is registered to an LLC formed in Fresno County 8 months ago. I'm still pulling the formation documents." I looked at the spreadsheet. 6 rows, 6 dates between March and October. 6 amounts that added up to a number that represented 18 years of mortgage payments, of careful budgeting, of choosing the modest vacation over the expensive one and the sensible car over the impressive one. "Can this be recovered?" I asked. Linda looked at Reed. Reed looked at me. "That depends on where it went," Reed said. "Which is what Linda is going to tell us. But, Walter, there's something else." He slid a second document across the table. "Diane has been receiving the mail at your address before you do. We know this because the HELOC welcome packet and the monthly statements were never delivered to you. The postal records show they were delivered. Someone intercepted them. I thought about every morning for the past 9 months. Diane downstairs before me, moving through the kitchen, the sound of the mail slot on the front door. Her voice calling up the stairs that there was nothing important, just bills and circulars. She gets up earlier than I do," I said. "Yes," Reed said. "That evening I drove home the long way through the older residential streets of Clovis, past the elementary school Noah attended, past the park where I had taught Claire to ride a bicycle 19 years ago. I turned onto Ridgecrest Drive and pulled into the driveway and sat looking at the house for a moment before going inside. The porch light was on. Through the front window I could see the glow of the kitchen light Diane left on whenever she was away. The house looked exactly like what it was, a family home paid for slowly and carefully, over 18 years, the place where my children had grown up, and where I had believed without ever examining the belief too carefully that I was safe. Diane's car was in the driveway. She had come home from the hospital earlier than expected. I went inside. She was at the kitchen counter sorting through a small stack of envelopes. She looked up when I came in. "Anything interesting?" I asked. She smiled and set the envelopes down. "Just bills and a catalog," she said. "Nothing important." "That's what you always say," I said, and hung up my coat. I was not looking for anything. That is the part I keep returning to. I was not conducting a search. I was not acting on a tip from Reed or a suggestion from Ray. I was simply doing what I had done every Saturday morning for the past 3 years, clearing out the accumulated disorder of a week's worth of household paperwork from the small desk in the room off the kitchen that Diane had used as her home office before she moved her practice upstairs to the attic. She had taken everything meaningful with her when she moved up. The desk had become a repository for things that had not yet found a permanent place elsewhere. Noah's school permission slips, expired coupons, the instruction manual for the new coffee maker, a broken stapler I kept intending to replace. I was sorting through the bottom drawer, pulling things out and deciding what to keep and what to discard, when my hand reached something flat and stiff at the very back, pushed against the rear panel in the particular way of an object that had been placed there deliberately rather than dropped in carelessly. I almost set it aside. It was 2 years old. Whatever appointments it recorded were long past. But I am a librarian. I do not discard documents without examining them. It is not caution exactly or even professional habit. It is something closer to the belief trained into me over decades that a document is never entirely without meaning until you have actually read it. I sat down in the desk chair and opened the calendar to January. At first it looked like any other personal planner dentist appointments, Noah's school events, a note about Patricia's birthday in February, reminders about insurance renewals and car registrations. Diane's handwriting small and neat, the same handwriting I had watched sign birthday cards and grocery lists, and the backs of photographs for 22 years. Then I began to notice the other entries. They appeared roughly every 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes more frequently. Always a date, always a time, always a dollar amount, and always following the amount 1 or 2 words of description, written in a compressed shorthand that took me several pages to decipher. The recurring initial was M $1,400 rent assist, M $900 car repair, M $1,750 medical, M $600 utilities, M $2,000 travel, never more than $2,000 in a single entry. I thought of what Linda Marsh had told me 2 days earlier, that the HELOC transfers had been kept below $50,000 to avoid triggering automatic bank reviews. The same logic applied to a smaller scale. Transactions large enough to matter, but small enough individually to disappear into the ordinary noise of a household budget. I turned to the back of the calendar and found what I had suspected would be there, a running total, maintained in a column of figures so small I needed my reading glasses to make them out clearly. 41 months of entries. The sum at the bottom was written in pencil, and then traced over in pen as though Diane had first calculated it in draft, and then confirmed it in ink once she was satisfied it was correct. $87,420. $87,000 taken from our joint accounts in amounts small enough to go unnoticed over a period of nearly 3.5 years and given to Marcus Holt. I set the calendar on the desk in front of me and removed my reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose with 2 fingers. Then I turned to the page for October 18th, 2023. October 18th was my 60th birthday. I remembered that day with the particular clarity of a day that felt at the time genuinely good. Diane had organized a surprise party, 30 people in the backyard, the catered food from the Brazilian place on Blackstone Avenue that I loved, the chocolate cake with the photograph of me at 25 printed on the frosting that had made everyone laugh. She had given a short speech about what 20 years of marriage had meant to her. I had stood there in the October afternoon, light feeling without reservation, like a lucky man. The entry for October 18th, 2023 read, M $1,800 dinner and gift. I sat with that for a long time. She had organized my 60th birthday party in the afternoon. She had sent $1,800 to Marcus Holt the same evening. She had stood in my backyard and told 30 people what our marriage meant to her, and somewhere between the chocolate cake and the end of the night, she had transferred money from our joint account to the man she had been financing for 3.5 years. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that because it might seem like the moment when a person would cry, and I did not. What I felt was something more structural than grief, the sensation of a load-bearing assumption giving way silently and completely, the way a foundation shifts in a drought year without any visible crack appearing in the wall above it. I took out my phone and photographed every page of the calendar that contained an M entry, 41 months. I photographed the running total twice, once with flash and once without. Then I called Thomas Reed. I found something, I said. How significant, why, he asked. I looked at the calendar lying open on the desk, at Diane's handwriting, recording $87,000 paid to Marcus Holt over 3.5 years at the entry for my 60th birthday, sitting quietly among all the others. Significant, I said. Ray called at 6:53 in the morning. I was already awake. I had been awake since 4:30, lying in the dark beside Diane, listening to her breathe with the steady, untroubled rhythm of someone whose conscience was apparently not keeping her up. I had stared at the ceiling and thought about $87,000 and a birthday cake and a desk calendar and the particular quality of patience required to maintain a deception across 41 months without a single visible crack. I took the phone to the kitchen before answering. I have something you need to see in person, Ray said. His voice was lower than usual, the way it dropped when he was being careful about something. Can you come in before 8? I'll be there at 7:30, I said. Diane was still asleep when I left. I wrote a note on the kitchen counter, early meeting at the library back by noon, and drove to Van Ness Avenue through streets that were quiet in the particular way of a Sunday morning in December, when the whole city seems to be sleeping in. Ray was waiting outside his office door when I pulled into the lot. He had a paper coffee cup in each hand and an expression I had not seen on his face before, not concern exactly, but something adjacent to it, the look of a man who has found something he wishes he had not been paid to find. He handed me a coffee without speaking and unlocked the door. Inside, he set a new envelope on the desk between us, thinner than the last one. He opened it himself this time and removed 4 photographs, setting them out in a row without commentary. The first showed Diane and Noah and Marcus outside the Rocket Dog ice cream shop on Tower Boulevard, a place I had taken Noah a dozen times, a place he associated with good days, with the particular happiness of being allowed to choose any 2 toppings he wanted without negotiation. In the photograph, Noah was holding a cone in one hand. His other hand was in Marcus's. The second photograph was a closer shot taken from across the parking lot with a long lens. Marcus was crouched down to Noah's level, saying something. Noah was laughing the wide, uncomplicated laugh of a child who is entirely comfortable with the person in front of him. The third photograph showed Diane watching them. She was not laughing. She was watching with an expression I recognized from 22 years of marriage, the quiet, satisfied look she got when something she had arranged was going according to plan. I set the third photograph face down on the desk without being fully aware that I was doing it. There's a fourth one, Ray said. The fourth photograph was a still frame from a short video clip Ray had taken on his phone from across the street. He had printed it because the image quality was better than a screenshot. In it, Noah was tugging on Marcus's sleeve and saying something, his face tilted upward with the specific urgency of a 7-year-old who needs to be heard immediately. Ray said, My guy was close enough to hear it clearly. The boy said, and I am quoting exactly, "Dad, Mark, I want the one with the gummy bears." I looked at the photograph. Noah's face was turned upward toward Marcus with the unguarded trust that children extend to the adults they believe are safe. The expression on his face was not complicated. It was not confused or ambivalent or uncertain. It was the expression of a child asking his father for something he expected to receive. I had seen that expression 10,000 times in 7 years. It had always been directed at me. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Based on what I've been able to establish." Ray said, "Marcus has been a regular presence in your son's life for at least 6 months. Diane has been introducing him socially as a family friend. The Dad Mark designation that's harder to date. But kids don't assign names like that casually. Someone encouraged it." I set all 4 photographs face down on the desk in a neat stack. I thought about 4 days ago. Friday morning, before school, before the week had become what it had become. I had been in the kitchen making lunches when Noah appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, blinking against the kitchen light, dragging his blanket behind him, on the floor. "I had a bad dream," he said. "Come here," I said. He had climbed onto the kitchen counter stool and leaned against my shoulder while I finished making his sandwich, his blanket pooled around him, his eyes still half closed. I had made him a piece of toast with peanut butter, which was the designated cure for bad dreams in our household, a tradition we had established when he was 4 years old, and which he still observed without irony at 7. We had sat together at the kitchen island for 20 minutes while the December morning came up gray outside the window. He had fallen back asleep against my shoulder before he finished the toast. That was 4 days ago, before the light in the attic window, before Ray's first envelope, before $87,000 in a spiral-bound calendar, before I understood that the life I thought I was living had a different version running alongside it that I had never been shown. I stood up. "We need to move faster," I said. Ray looked at me steadily. "I know," he said. "I've been thinking the same thing." I drove from Ray's office to the library and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before going inside. I called Reed from the car. "The investigator has photographs of my son with Marcus Holt," I said. "Noah is calling him Dad Mark. Diane has been introducing him as a family figure for at least 6 months." Reed was quiet for 4 seconds. "Come in this afternoon," he said. "Bring the calendar photographs. We need to talk about timing." I said I would be there. I sat for another moment in the parking lot, looking at the entrance of the Fresno County Public Library at the banner in the window, advertising the December reading program, at the ordinary Tuesday morning foot traffic of people going in and out with books and bags and strollers living their uncomplicated lives in the December California sun. Then I went inside and opened the building for the day. Linda Marsh had been busy. When I arrived at Reed's office at 2 o'clock that Sunday afternoon, she was already at the conference table with her laptop open and 3 printed spreadsheets arranged side by side in the precise overlapping formation of someone who had been working since early morning. She had drawn a flowchart by hand on a yellow legal pad, boxes connected by arrows, each box containing an account number or an entity name or a dollar figure. The whole thing rendered in the careful, unhurried penmanship of a woman who believed that clarity was a form of respect. Reed poured coffee from the machine in the corner and set a cup in front of me without asking whether I wanted one. "Tell him what you found," he said to Linda. Linda turned the legal pad so it faced me across the table and tapped the bottom box with her pen. "The $241,000 from your HELOC ended up here," she said. "This is a limited liability company registered in Fresno County under the name Crestview Property Holdings, LLC. It was formed 8 months ago. The registered agent is a name I didn't recognize initially, but the formation documents list one member with full managing authority." She paused. "Marcus Holt." I looked at the flowchart. 6 arrows, 6 transfers, 6 amounts, all flowing from the HELOC account to a single destination. "He used the money to purchase a property," Linda continued. "A single-family residence in Clovis, 4.2 miles from your house. The purchase closed 6 weeks ago. The deed is in the name of Crestview Property Holdings, LLC. She removed her reading glasses and set them on the table. "Your equity bought Marcus Holt a house." The room was quiet for a moment. "What are my options?" I asked. Reed leaned forward. "In California, all property acquired during a marriage using marital funds is presumed to be community property, meaning it belongs equally to both spouses regardless of whose name is on the title. The HELOC was secured against your marital home. The funds were marital assets. Even though Diane used the power of attorney to authorize the transactions, the underlying assets were community property, and their transfer to a third party, for no consideration, meaning Marcus received them without giving anything of equivalent value, in return constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty between spouses. He set his pen down. That gives us grounds to petition the court to void the transactions and recover the assets. How long does that take? I asked. That depends on how cooperative the other side is, Reed said, which is why I want to take a preliminary step today before Diane realizes we've found the LLC. He looked at me steadily. I want to go to Wells Fargo this afternoon and file a formal fraud report on the HELOC authorization. The power of attorney you signed was obtained through deception fraud in the factum, as we discussed. We put the bank on notice that the authorization instrument was procured fraudulently and request that they flag the account pending investigation. Can they do that without Diane's knowledge? I asked. The bank can flag and freeze an account for fraud investigation on the report of either account holder, Reed said. They don't need both signatures to initiate a review. They need evidence of potential fraud, which we have. He picked up his pen again. This does two things. It prevents any further draws on the HELOC, and it creates an official record of the dispute, which matters enormously if this goes to court. We drove to the Wells Fargo branch on Shaw Avenue at 3:15. Reed did the talking. He was precise and unhurried, presenting the documentation in the order he had organized it in the car. The power of attorney, the calendar photographs. The flow chart Linda had prepared, the deed, showing the Clovis property transferred to Marcus's LLC. The fraud officer, a careful, deliberate woman in her 40s, who introduced herself as the branch compliance manager, examined each document without expression and asked 3 clarifying questions. Then she picked up her phone and made a call. 15 minutes later, she returned to the consultation room and set a printed confirmation sheet on the table in front of Reed. The HELOC account has been flagged for fraud investigation and frozen pending review, she said. No further draws can be made until the investigation is complete. You'll receive written confirmation at the address on file within 5 business days. Reed thanked her and gathered the documents. In the car on the way back, he said, Diane will know something has happened the next time she tries to access that account. Good, I said. I was home before 5. Diane was in the kitchen starting dinner, pasta on the stove, a glass of white wine on the counter beside her. Noah was at the kitchen table, building something complicated out of Lego bricks, narrating the construction to himself, in a low, focused murmur that I had loved since he was 4 years old. How was your afternoon? Diane asked without turning from the stove. Productive, I said. I hung up my coat and sat at the kitchen table beside Noah. He held up a partially assembled structure and explained to me in considerable detail that it was going to be a rocket ship once he found the right pieces for the nose cone. I told him it looked like an excellent rocket ship. Diane set dinner on the table at 6. We ate together the way we had eaten together for 22 years. Noah between us talking about his friends and his teacher and the injustice of having to practice multiplication facts on a Sunday. Diane refilled her wine glass once. She asked me twice about my day in the careful, casual way of someone conducting surveillance in the other direction. After dinner, she went upstairs to call the hospital about Patricia. I was rinsing the dishes when her footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. Walter, she called down. Did the bank contact you today? I got a notification on my phone that something changed on one of our accounts. I turned off the tap. That's strange, I called back. I didn't hear anything. I'll call them tomorrow and find out what it was. A pause. Okay, she said. Thanks. I turned the tap back on and finished the dishes. Reed slid a single sheet of paper across the desk on Monday morning. 4 items, numbered, no preamble, no explanation beyond what the items themselves contained. He had the manner of a man who had learned that clarity was more useful than comfort in situations where both were available, but only one could be chosen. These are things you can do legally immediately and without her knowledge, he said. I want them done in this order over the next 48 hours. Not all at once spacing them reduces the chance she identifies a pattern before we're ready. He tapped the sheet once. Read it here. Don't take it with you. I read it. Item 1. Cancel the supplementary credit card issued in Diane's name on Walter's primary account. As the primary account holder, Walter had unilateral authority to cancel any supplementary cards at any time without requiring the supplementary cardholder's consent or notification. Item 2. Contact the leasing company and suspend driving privileges on the Lexus ES currently registered in Walter's name and carried on his insurance policy. The vehicle belonged to Walter. He had the right to restrict its use. Item 3. Change the passwords on all personal accounts. Email, banking, iCloud. Backup. Any platform that held financial or personal data that Diane accessed using credentials Walter had originally created or shared. Item 4. Open an individual checking account at a different institution and redirect his library paycheck to the new account. Effective the next pay cycle. I set the sheet down and looked at Reed. These feel small, I said. They are small, Reed said. That's the point. They are individually unremarkable. Together they do something significant. They close the doors she has been moving through without her realizing the doors are closing. He folded his hands on the desk. You are not trying to win a confrontation, Walter. You are trying to limit her operational capacity before she completes whatever she is left to complete. There is a difference. I drove home and did item 4. First opened a checking account at a Tri-Counties Bank branch on Herndon Avenue during my lunch break, spoke to a personal banker for 12 minutes, and arranged for my direct deposit to redirect, beginning the following pay cycle. It felt absurdly ordinary the way consequential things often do, when they are accomplished through paperwork rather than drama. Item 3. I completed that evening after Diane left for the hospital. I sat at the kitchen desk with my laptop and changed 7 passwords in 40 minutes. The Wells Fargo personal savings account I had held since 1998, the iCloud account where 18 years of family photographs were stored, the email address I used for financial correspondence, the library credit union account, 3 others. I chose passwords I had never used before and wrote them in a small notebook. I locked in my desk drawer at the library the following morning. Item 2, I completed on Tuesday at 8:15 while Diane was in the shower. I called the insurance company from the driveway sitting in my Camry with the engine running against the December cold and reported the Lexus as temporarily unavailable for use by any driver other than myself. The representative asked no questions that I found difficult to answer. The change took 4 minutes. Item 1 I saved for last. I called the credit card company at 7:45 Tuesday morning from the staff parking lot at the library before anyone else arrived. I gave my account number, confirmed my identity with the security questions, and asked to cancel the supplementary card issued to Diane Marie Gaines. The representative read back the last 4 digits of the card. I confirmed them. She said the card would be deactivated within the hour and asked if I needed anything else. I said I did not. The report from Ray came at 2:17 that afternoon. His text message contained 4 words, "Check your email now." I went to the staff break room and opened my laptop. Ray had sent a short message with a photograph attached. The photograph showed Diane and Marcus standing at a register inside Pottery Barn at Fig Garden Village. Diane was holding a credit card in one hand and a shopping bag handle in the other. Her expression, captured at the precise moment the transaction was declined, was one I had seen before. A very brief, very controlled flash of something she did not intend to show, followed immediately by the composed, pleasant face she wore in public. Marcus was standing 2 steps behind her. He was looking at his phone. Ray's email said simply, "Card declined at 2:04 p.m. She tried twice. Paid cash for a smaller item. They left separately. I closed the laptop and went back to the reference desk. Diane came home at 6:30. I was in the armchair by the front window with a library copy of a Nevada bar mystery novel I had been recommending to patrons for 2 weeks, without having read it myself. Noah was upstairs. The house was quiet in the way it was quiet on weekday evenings, a particular domestic stillness that I had spent 22 years believing was the sound of contentment. Diane set her keys on the entryway table and stood in the doorway to the living room. "My credit card isn't working," she said. Her voice was careful, not alarmed, not accusatory, but calibrated in the way of someone choosing their register deliberately. "I tried it at a couple of places this afternoon. Both times it declined." I looked up from the book. "That's odd," I said. "Which card?" "The Visa, the one on your account." I set the book face down on my knee. "I'll call them tomorrow and find out what happened. Probably a security flag. They do that sometimes when the spending pattern changes." Diane looked at me for a moment longer than the conversation required. Something moved across her face that she redirected quickly. Not suspicion exactly, but a recalibration, the look of someone who has just updated an internal calculation. "Okay," she said. "Thanks." She went upstairs. I picked up the Nevada Bar novel and found my page and read the same paragraph 4 times, without retaining a single word of it. Ray's message arrived at 11:43 Wednesday morning. I was at the reference desk helping a retired school teacher named Bev find audiobook recommendations for her book club. She wanted something with a strong female lead, nothing too violent, preferably set somewhere interesting. I suggested 3 titles, walked her to the audiobook section, and waited until she was settled before I stepped into the staff hallway and looked at my phone. Ray had sent a video file with a single line of text beneath it. Parking structure on Fulton, 11 this morning. $187,000 transfer attempt blocked overnight. Watch to the end. I found an empty study room, closed the door, and played the clip with the volume low. The parking structure was 1-2 blocks from Reed's office, a gray concrete building where municipal employees and courthouse visitors left their cars. The clip was 91 seconds long, filmed from inside Ray's car through the windshield, slightly compressed by distance but clear enough to follow. Diane and Marcus were standing beside her Lexus on the 2nd level. The Lexus that Marcus apparently did not know had been quietly suspended from use by anyone but me. They were not holding hands. They were not standing close. They were standing the way 2 people stand when something has gone wrong that they each believe the other one caused. Marcus was speaking. I could not hear the words clearly through the windshield glass and the ambient noise of the structure, but I did not need to. The body language was its own language, arms, moving head, shaking one hand, jabbing the air between them in the emphatic, dismissive gesture of a man who has stopped trying to persuade and started trying to punish. His face, when Ray's camera caught it at the right angle, was not the face of a man in distress. It was the face of a man who had decided that a problem he had invested in was no longer worth the investment. Diane stood with her arms crossed and her chin up. She was saying something in return. Short sentences controlled the voice she used when she was managing something. She did not want to escalate, but her hands visible at her sides, where her arms crossed over them, were not controlled. Her fingers were pressing into her own forearms, hard enough that I could see the tension in her knuckles from 20 feet away through a car windshield. At the 73rd second, Marcus stopped talking. He looked at Diane for a long moment with an expression I recognized not from him, because I had met him only once, but from the expression itself, which was the particular look of someone revising their assessment of a situation they had previously considered resolved. Then he picked up his bag, turned and walked toward the stairwell without looking back. Diane stood beside the suspended Lexus and watched him go. I closed the video and sat in the empty study room for a moment. I had been waiting, I realized, for something like this moment to feel like a victory. The man who had taken $87,000 from my household accounts, who had walked out of my house carrying my mother's bracelet, who had crouched down in a parking lot and let my 7-year-old son call him Dad Mark. That man had just discovered that the money had stopped and that the woman he had partnered with could no longer deliver what she had promised. He had turned and walked away without looking back. I did not feel victorious. What I felt was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The specific exhaustion of understanding completely and without remaining uncertainty something that you have spent a long time refusing to understand. I thought about the evening in March of 2003 when Diane had sat across from me at a restaurant on Van Ness Avenue, a different restaurant than Ray's office building, but the same street which struck me now as a coincidence that meant nothing, and somehow felt like it meant everything, and told me about the inheritance from her aunt. I had argued against accepting the money for 2 weeks. She had been patient with every objection. She had said on the last night of those 2 weeks, with a directness I had found completely disarming, "I'm not doing this out of pity, Walter. I'm doing this because I think you're worth believing in. People who are worth believing in deserve someone who acts like it." I had believed her. I had believed her for 22 years, through mortgage payments and school pickups and hospital waiting rooms and birthday parties and every ordinary Wednesday of a life I had thought was shared. I picked up my phone and called Reed. "The clip came through," I said. "I saw it," Reed said. "It changes things." "How?" "Marcus is pulling back," Reed said. "When a partner starts withdrawing from a joint enterprise under pressure, the other partner typically does one of 2 things. They either accelerate, try to complete whatever they were building before the structure collapses entirely, or they reach." He paused. I expect Diane to reach Walter in the next 48 to 72 hours. She's going to come to you with something. What kind of something? I asked. Something that requires your signature, Reed said. Be ready. I went back to the reference desk. Bev was still in the audiobook section holding 2 cases and comparing the back covers with the focused deliberation of someone making a decision that mattered to her. I straightened a display near the entrance and watched the afternoon library foot traffic move through the space I had tended for 18 years, the regulars and the occasional visitors, the students and the retirees, the people who came in from the December cold for reasons that had nothing to do with books. At 9:15 that night, after Noah was in bed and the house had settled into its evening quiet, there was a knock on the door of my home office. Diane opened it without waiting for an answer. She was wearing the gray sweater she wore on evenings when she was trying to seem approachable, rather than composed, a distinction I had learned to make only recently, which meant I had been failing to make it for 22 years. She leaned against the doorframe with her arms at her sides, her expression arranged into something that was meant to look like exhaustion and vulnerability, but that I now read as preparation. "Can we talk?" she said. "Just the 2 of us, tonight." I closed the book on my desk and looked at her. "Of course," I said. "Sit down." Before I reveal the shocking confrontation, next please drop a 22 in the comments so I know you're still here, standing with Walter. Also please note, the upcoming events include some fictional elements and may not be completely factual. If this isn't the type of content you're looking for, feel free to turn off the video right here. But if you're ready, let's continue. She did not ask for his signature that night. That surprised me briefly until I understood that she was not ready yet. She sat in the chair across from my desk in the gray sweater and talked for 40 minutes about Patricia, about the declining monitors, the night nurses, the particular exhaustion of watching someone you love move toward the end of something. She cried twice briefly in the controlled way she had, of allowing herself exactly enough emotion to seem genuine without surrendering composure entirely. She said she felt alone. She said she missed the way things used to be between us. She said she was sorry she had been so distracted lately. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I said that I understood that I was sorry about Patricia, that we would get through it together. I said the things a husband of 22 years would say. They came to me without difficulty, which told me something about the distance I had traveled in, the 10 days since I had sat in the parking lot on Ridgecrest Drive, watching Marcus carry my mother's bracelet to a silver sedan. Before she left my office, she said, almost as an afterthought, "Could we get coffee tomorrow morning? Just us. There's something I need to talk to you about, something I should have brought up sooner." "Of course," I said. "Review coffee, 9 o'clock. She smiled a small, relieved smile that I had once found completely trustworthy and said goodnight. I called Reed at 7 the following morning. "She wants coffee," I said. 9 o'clock, review coffee on North Van Ness. "I've been expecting this," Reed said. "Go, listen to everything, do not sign anything regardless of what she tells you." A pause. Walter, California is a one-party consent state. Under Penal Code, Section 632, a participant in a conversation may record that conversation without notifying the other party. You can record everything she says, legally, without qualification. "I know," I said. I had already looked it up. I arrived at Review Coffee at 8:45. It was a place we had been coming to for 15 years. A narrow storefront on North Van Ness with exposed brick walls, mismatched chairs, and a counter staffed by people who remembered your order after the second visit. We had a usual table, a corner to top, near the window that caught the morning light in winter. I went directly to it, ordered a black coffee and a tea I did not intend to drink, and placed my phone face down on the table in voice memo mode. Under the phone, I placed a folded paper napkin. Diane arrived at 9:03. She was wearing the dark coat she wore for important occasions. Not the hospital coat, not the casual jacket, but the charcoal wool one she had bought for a colleague's retirement dinner 3 years ago. Her hair was down. She had taken care with how she looked, which told me she had taken care with what she planned to say. She ordered a latte at the counter, came to the table, set her bag on the floor, and sat down. She looked at me with an expression I had seen her deploy before, the expression of someone who is about to say something difficult and wants credit in advance for the difficulty of saying it. "I need to talk to you about Danny," she said. Danny was her younger brother. He lived in Bakersfield and worked in construction and had, by Diane's account over the years, a persistent and complicated relationship with financial stability. I had met him 4 times in 22 years. He was not someone I thought about often. "What's going on with Danny?" I asked. She wrapped both hands around her latte cup and looked down at the table. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "He's in serious trouble," she said. "He borrowed money from people he shouldn't have borrowed from. I don't know all the details, he won't tell me everything, but it's bad, Walter. He called me last week, and he was scared in a way I've never heard him scared before." Her voice dropped. "He needs $50,000 by the end of the month, or he doesn't know what's going to happen to him." I looked at her. "That's a lot of money, Diane." "I know." She pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. "I know it is, and I know the timing is terrible with everything going on with Mom, but he's my brother, and I don't know what else to do." She reached into her bag and removed a manila folder. She set it on the table between us, but did not open it. "The only way I can help him is if we refinance the house. I talked to a broker last week. The equity is there. It would take 2 weeks, maybe less." She looked at me directly. "I need you to sign the application with me." The folder sat between us on the table. I looked at it for a moment. Then I reached out and pushed my coffee cup gently to one side, and with the same unhurried motion, I lifted the paper napkin from beneath my phone and set it beside the folder. The voice memo on my phone had been running for 18 minutes. "Diane," I said, "before I sign anything, I'd like to play you something." She frowned. "Play me something." I picked up my phone and opened the video Ray had sent me 3 days earlier, the 91-second clip from the parking structure on Fulton Street. I turned the volume up and set the phone on the table between us. The clip was not long enough to require patience. Within 15 seconds, Marcus's voice was audible, not the words not clearly, but the tone of them, which was unmistakable. Within 30 seconds, Diane's own voice was audible in response, short, controlled managing. At the 53rd second, in a moment of acoustic clarity that Ray had apparently not expected when he filmed it, Diane's voice came through the car window with sufficient distinctness to be understood. She was saying, "He has no idea. He never has." The clip ended. The coffee shop moved around us, the counter staff, the morning regulars, the hiss of the espresso machine, the particular ambient warmth of a place that had been part of my ordinary life for 15 years. Diane sat across from me with her hands around her latte cup and her face completely, absolutely still. "I'll need my attorney to review any documents before I sign them," I said. "That's been true for some time now, actually. I should have mentioned it sooner." Diane's hands tightened around the cup. She opened her mouth. Then she closed it. For the first time in 22 years of marriage in a coffee shop, we had been visiting since before Noah was born, Diane Marie. Gaines had nothing ready to say. "Drink your coffee," I said. "It'll get cold." The text came from a number I did not recognize at 6:41 on Friday evening. "I need to meet with you, alone. This is Marcus." I read it twice, set my phone on the kitchen counter, and finished making Noah's dinner, grilled cheese cut diagonally the way he preferred, with a small bowl of tomato soup for dipping, which was a tradition we had established when he was 5 and which he still observed at 7, with the same seriousness he applied to most things he considered important. I sat with him while he ate. We talked about his school's upcoming winter concert, about the part he had been assigned in the class presentation, about whether a grilled cheese sandwich dipped in tomato soup constituted one food or two. He decided it was one food. I said I thought he made a compelling argument. After he was in bed, I went to my home office and called Reed. "Marcus Holt sent me a text," I said. "He wants to meet. Alone." Reed was quiet for a moment. "Where does he suggest?" "He didn't. He's waiting for my response." "Then you choose the location," Reed said. "Somewhere public, open, low foot traffic at the time you select. Morning is better than evening, and Walter, listen to what he has to say. Don't make promises. Don't offer him anything. Don't tell him what you do or don't intend to do with whatever he gives you. Just receive it." I thought about this. You think he has something to give. I think a man who reaches out directly to the person he has been working against the day after that person played a recording of his partner in a coffee shop is not reaching out to negotiate, Reed said. He's reaching out because the structure has failed and he is trying to find the exit before the building comes down on him. I texted Marcus back. "Woodward Park, north entrance by the lake, 6:45 tomorrow morning." He replied within 30 seconds. "I'll be there." I arrived at the park at 6:30. December mornings in Fresno were cold enough to keep the casual visitors away. The joggers and the dog walkers would come later after 7, when the light improved and the temperature climbed a few degrees. At 6:30, the north entrance was empty except for a maintenance worker moving along the path on a small electric cart, and the lake was flat and gray under a sky that had not yet decided what color it intended to be. I sat on a bench facing the water and waited. Marcus arrived at 6:43. He was wearing a jacket that was not warm enough for the morning and carrying nothing. He looked older than the man I remembered from a dinner party 3 years ago, and older than the man I had seen in Ray's photographs, not older in years, but in the particular way that accumulates when something has gone wrong that cannot be undone by time. He stopped a few feet from the bench and looked at me. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "Sit down," I said. He sat at the far end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between us. He looked out at the lake for a long moment without speaking. I waited. A man who has managed a public reference desk for 18 years develops a reliable tolerance for silence that other people find uncomfortable. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and removed a USB drive. It was small and black, the standard kind sold in multi-packs at any office supply store. He held it for a moment, looking at it, and then he set it on the bench between us. "Everything is on there," he said. Text messages going back 14 months. 3 audio recordings she made of her own planning conversations. She recorded them herself, I think, to have leverage over me if things went wrong. Photographs, financial records she kept separately from whatever she gave the accountants. He paused. "There's a folder on there labeled D Notes. Read that one first." "What's in it?" I asked. Marcus looked at the lake. "Things she said about you," he said. "To me, over the years." He pressed his lips together briefly. "She told me you were infertile, that Noah and Claire were donor conceived without your knowledge. She used that to justify—" He stopped. I tried again. "She said it meant the assets were never really yours in the way a husband's assets are, that she was entitled to—" He stopped again. The lake surface moved slightly in the morning wind. "She was not telling the truth," I said. "It was not a question." "I don't know," Marcus said quietly. "I believed her for a long time. I'm not sure when I stopped." He turned and looked at me directly for the first time since he sat down. "I'm not going to insult you by pretending I did this because I suddenly grew a conscience. I'm doing it because I spoke to a criminal defense attorney on Wednesday, and he was very clear with me about what my exposure looks like if the fraud investigation proceeds with the documentation currently in your attorney's possession." He held my gaze. "I am doing this to protect myself. I want you to know that I know that, and that I'm not asking you to think better of me for it." I looked at him for a moment. There was something almost restful about a man who did not pretend. "I understand," I said. I reached out and picked up the USB drive and put it in my coat pocket. I stood up from the bench. Marcus stayed seated, still looking at the lake, his jacket still not warm enough for the morning. "What happens now?" he asked. "That's not something I can tell you," I said. "You should continue talking to your attorney." I walked back to the north entrance the way I had come. My car was the only one in the small lot beside the park entrance. I got in and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Through the windshield, I could see the open land east of the park, the flat Central Valley fields that stretched away toward the Sierra Nevada foothills, brown and quiet in the December morning, the mountains barely visible through the low winter haze. It was the landscape I had lived in for 40 years. It looked exactly as it always had. I thought about Noah deciding that grilled cheese dipped in tomato soup was one food. I thought about Claire helping me carry boxes into my first apartment in Fresno 25 years ago, when she was barely tall enough to see over the top of the box she was carrying. I thought about the morning in March when I had signed a stack of papers at my own kitchen table while my son ran a fever upstairs, and I trusted the woman across from me the way you trust something you have never had reason to doubt. I called Reed. "I have everything," I said. A pause. Then Reed said, "Come in Monday morning, bring whatever he gave you. We need to talk about next steps." I started the engine and drove home through the quiet December streets of Fresno, past the library, past Noah's school, past the Brazilian restaurant on Blackstone Avenue where 60 candles had once burned on a chocolate cake, while Diane told 30 people what our marriage meant to her. Reed was waiting with Linda and Ray when I arrived at 8 o'clock Monday morning. 3 folders on the conference table, coffee already poured. Nobody spoke when I came in, which told me that whatever had been said before I arrived had been sufficient, and that what remained was for me to hear. I sat down and placed the USB drive on the table between us. Ray picked it up without comment and connected it to his laptop. Linda had her own computer open the spreadsheet she had been building for the past week, visible on the screen-colored lines, account numbers, transfer dates, a document that had grown considerably since the first version she had shown me 6 days earlier. Reed had his legal pad and his pen and the particular expression he wore when he had organized his thoughts into an order he considered final. "I want to go through this chronologically," Reed said. "From the beginning. I think you need to hear it as a complete sequence rather than as the pieces you've been receiving one at a time." "All right," I said. What followed was 40 minutes of the most precise and thorough accounting of my own life that I had ever experienced. Reed spoke, Linda spoke, Ray spoke, I listened. They began earlier than 2002, which surprised me because I had believed the story began with Marcus emptying the business account. Reed explained that the USB drive contained messages between Diane and Marcus that predated the bankruptcy by at least 3 years. They had known each other since at least 1999. The dissolution of my business partnership had not been an opportunistic betrayal by a man who saw a chance. It had been a planned extraction, coordinated between them, timed for a period when my business was sufficiently solvent to be worth targeting, and my trust in Marcus was sufficiently established to make the execution clean. Linda took over at that point. "The $41,000 Marcus transferred out of your business account in 2002, she said, turning her laptop toward me. I traced it. It moved through 2 intermediary accounts over a period of 6 weeks. The destination account was held in the name of a woman named Patricia Calloway. She looked at me steadily. Diane's mother. The room was quiet. Patricia Calloway received the funds, Linda continued. 18 months later, a transfer of $38,000 was made from Patricia Calloway's account to a cashier's check. She paused. The cashier's check was made out to Walter Gaines. It was the money Diane gave you in March of 2003, the inheritance from the aunt. $3,000 had been absorbed in transfer fees and holding costs over 18 months. She returned $38,000 of the $41,000 she had taken. I sat with that information for a moment. There was no aunt. There had never been an aunt. Diane had taken my money, held it for 18 months, and given it back to me as a gesture of belief. I had spent 22 years feeling grateful for something that had been mine to begin with. I had built a marriage on the foundation of a debt that did not exist to a woman who had manufactured the crisis that made the debt feel necessary. I did not speak for a long time. Ray said quietly, "There's more in the D-Notes folder, things she said about you over the years to Marcus in writing. I've read them. You don't have to." "I know," I said. "Not today." Reed folded his hands on the table. "The good news, if we can call it that, is that the USB gives us everything we could not previously prove. The prior coordination, the transfer chain, the planning documentation." He picked up his pen. "The fraud case is no longer a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of documented record." Linda said, "The financial exposure, as it currently stands, the HELOC, the transfers to the LLC, the $87,000 in withdrawals from joint accounts, totals approximately $378,000. With the community property framework and the documented fraud recovery is realistic. Not immediate, but realistic." I looked at the table, the folders, the laptop screens, the accumulated documentation of 16 years of planning reduced to a conference table in a brick building on Fulton Street on a Monday morning in December. I thought about something Noah had said on Saturday morning, sitting at the kitchen counter, eating his cereal, watching me make coffee. He had said without apparent context the way 7-year-olds introduce observations that have been waiting for an opening. "Dad, do you think the library will still be there when I grow up?" I had said that I thought it probably would. He had said, "Good, I like that you work there." I looked at Reed. "Will my children be protected through this?" I asked. "Legally, financially, will they be all right?" Reed said, "Yes. Claire is an adult and has no liability exposure. Noah is a minor. As your dependent, his interests are protected under the divorce filing. The family home, given that the HELOC fraud is documented, has a strong basis for remaining with you and the children." He paused. "They will be all right." I pushed back my chair and stood up. I put on my coat. I picked up my bag. I looked at the three people across the table who had spent the past 2 weeks helping me understand the shape of something I had been living inside without knowing its dimensions. "Okay," I said, "let's begin." I drafted the email on Tuesday morning while Noah was at school. Diane had left early for the hospital. Patricia had taken another difficult turn overnight. The night nurse had called at 2 in the morning, and Diane had dressed in the dark and gone without waking me, or without attempting to wake me, which I had come to understand were no longer the same thing. The house was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and the legal pad where I had been keeping notes since the first morning I had driven to Thomas Reed's office on Fulton Street. I had spoken to Reed the previous afternoon about this step. He had said, "You have the right to share truthful documented information with whoever you choose. What you want to avoid is anything that could be characterized as harassment or that contains statements you cannot support with evidence in hand." He had paused. "Keep it factual. Attach the documents. Don't editorialize. Let the evidence speak." I had been thinking about the list for several days, not with anger, or not only with anger, but with the specific deliberateness of someone who understands that the people on a list like this have been deceived as surely as he has, and that they deserve to know what they have been deceived about. Diane's family placed enormous value on reputation. Her older brother ran a small insurance agency in Visalia and sat on the board of his church. Her two sisters were both active in their communities, one in Fresno, one in Sacramento. Her mother's sisters, the aunts who had come to our wedding and sent Christmas cards for 22 years, were women who spoke carefully about character and consequence. They had believed, as I had believed, that Diane was a particular kind of person. The email was 4 sentences long. The first sentence said that I was sharing this information because I believed the people receiving it had a right to know the truth about events that had affected our family. The second sentence said that the attached documents had been verified by a licensed attorney, a forensic accountant, and a licensed private investigator. The third sentence listed without elaboration what the attached documents showed: a fraudulently obtained home equity line of credit, financial records documenting 3.5 years of undisclosed transfers to a third party, and an audio recording made legally under California law. The fourth sentence said that divorce proceedings would be filed this week, and that I was not seeking a response. I attached 7 documents. I did not attach the D Notes folder from the USB drive. Whatever Diane had written about me in private was between her and whoever she chose to tell. I did not need it. The financial documentation was sufficient, and it was the kind of evidence that did not require context to be understood. I read the email 3 times. On the third reading, I deleted 2 sentences I had written in an earlier draft, and then added back and then deleted again one about the birthday party and one about the aunt who had never existed. They were true. They were documented. But they were the kind of sentences written by a man who wanted the people reading them to understand how much he had been hurt, and I did not think that was information I was entitled to ask 32 people to carry. The list of recipients took longer to compile than the email itself. 12 members of Diane's extended family, 8 parents from the school. Noah attended people who had sat across from Diane at fundraising committees and classroom volunteer meetings and the spring carnival for 7 years. 6 former colleagues from the insurance brokerage where Diane had worked before she went independent. 4 members of the neighborhood association where we had both served on the landscaping committee for 3 years. 2 people I was less certain about, but included because they had been close to Diane in ways that seemed to me now like they deserved to know. 32 names. I looked at the list for a long moment. Then I looked at the 4 sentences of the email, clean and factual, and attached to 7 documents that told a story I had not been permitted to know for 22 years. I hit send at 11:17 in the morning. I closed the laptop and washed my coffee cup and drove to the library for the afternoon shift. I cataloged 14 new acquisitions, helped a man in his 70s set up a library card account, for the first time recommended 3 mysteries to a woman who said she wanted something she couldn't put down, and answered the reference desk phone 6 times. At 2:43, Ray sent a text message her brother just called her. Heard it from the parking lot across the street. She's outside on the phone now. Her voice is carrying. At 3:01, Ray sent a second text. She's back inside. 14 missed calls in the last hour. I was helping a child find a book about dinosaurs when the second message arrived. I read it, put my phone in my shirt pocket, and showed the child where the natural history section began. He wanted the one with the biggest pictures. I found him 3 options, and let him choose. I drove home at 5:30. The house on Ridgecrest Drive was dark. Diane's car was not in the driveway. Noah's after-school program van had dropped him at 4. He was at the kitchen table when I came in, working on a drawing with considerable concentration. I stood in the doorway for a moment and watched him. His tongue was pressed against the corner of his mouth, the way it got when he was concentrating on something that mattered to him. His pencil moved in careful, deliberate strokes across the paper. He had not heard me come in, or he had heard me, and decided the drawing required his full attention, first, which was a priority system I completely understood. "What are you making?" I asked. He looked up. "A rocket ship," he said. "A better one than last time." I hung up my coat and sat down across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat that first morning, with a cold cup of coffee, and the beginning of a question I had not yet known how to ask. The drawing was more detailed than the previous one. He had added windows along the side, a row of small circles evenly spaced, and a flame coming from the bottom that he had colored in 3 shades of orange. "Show me," I said. He turned it around so it faced me and held it up with both hands, his chin lifted slightly in the manner of someone presenting work they were proud of and knew they should be proud of. I looked at it carefully, the way it deserved. "That's a serious rocket ship," I said. "It has to go far," Noah said, as though this explained the windows and the 3-color flame and the care in every line. Then he set it back down and went back to work, and I sat across from him in the quiet kitchen, while the December evening settled around the house, and I thought about 32 names and 7 documents and 17 in the morning. And I thought about how the largest things in a life so often happen alongside the smallest ones, without either one interrupting the other. She came at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas Eve. I was at the reference desk when the main doors opened and Diane walked in. I knew immediately that she had come for me specifically, and not for a book, because she was wearing the charcoal wool coat again, the important occasions coat. And because she walked through the lobby the way people walk when they have rehearsed what they are going to say and are holding it carefully in the front of their mind to make sure they do not lose it before they arrive. Margaret, the circulation desk supervisor who had worked beside me for 11 years, looked up from the returns cart and then looked at me, and then looked back at the returns cart in the practiced way of a library employee who had learned when a patron situation was not a patron situation. "The conference room is free," she said quietly without looking up. "Thank you," I said. I came out from behind the reference desk and met Diane in the middle of the lobby between the new releases display and the periodicals rack in the open floor of the building, where I had spent more of my working life than any other single location on Earth. "Can we talk?" she said. Her voice was controlled, but the control was effortful in a way I could hear clearly, now that I had spent 2 weeks listening to her more carefully than I had listened in 22 years. "This way," I said. I took her to the small conference room at the back of the building, a room with a rectangular table, 8 chairs, a whiteboard on one wall, and a window that looked out onto the staff parking lot. I used it on Wednesday evenings for the adult literacy program I had been running for 9 years, a 2-hour weekly session for people who were learning to read or improving their reading skills as adults. The room smelled faintly of dry erase markers and the particular institutional warmth of a space that was used consistently and cared for by people who valued what happened in it. I held the door open for Diane. She went in. I followed and closed the door behind us, but did not sit down. I stood near the door with my hands at my sides. She sat at the table. She set her bag on the chair beside her. She looked at me for a moment, and then she began. She talked for a long time. She talked about the early years, the apartment on Tuileries Street, where we had lived before we could afford the house, the way the heater had broken 3 winters in a row, and we had slept with extra blankets and laughed about it in the morning. She talked about the night Claire was born, how I had driven too fast to St. Agnes, and then stood in the hallway for 4 hours because there was nothing useful I could do and I could not make myself sit down. She talked about the summer we took Noah to Yosemite when he was 4 years old, and he had stood at the valley overlook and gone completely silent for a full minute, looking at the granite walls and the waterfalls before turning to us and saying with total seriousness that he thought it was the biggest thing he had ever seen. She talked about things I had not thought about in years, things I had filed away in the unexamined archive of a long shared life, and she talked about them with a specificity and a warmth that I recognized as genuine, the genuine recollection of a person who had actually experienced what they were describing. which was more troubling in some ways than if she had been fabricating everything, because it meant that some portion of what we had was real, and I did not know how to hold that alongside what I now knew about the rest of it. She said she was sorry. She said it several times in different ways, and I listened to each version with the same attention I gave to all of it, because I had decided before she arrived that whatever she came here to say deserved to be heard in full. She said that things had gone further than she had intended. She said that she had told herself for a long time that she was protecting herself, that she had reasons that the things she had done were responses to fears she had never been able to say out loud. She said that she knew this was not an explanation, and that she was not offering it as one. She said that she had loved me, and that she was aware of how that sounded under the circumstances, and that she was saying it anyway, because it was true in the way that something can be true and coexist with other things that seem to contradict it. She said that she was frightened about Patricia, about what came next, about the phone calls that had not stopped since yesterday morning, about the fact that her brother had told her in the particular flat tone he used when he had made a decision he would not revisit, that he did not want to hear from her until she had something different to say. She said that she missed Noah. She said that she understood if I could not forgive her. She ran out of things to say at some point after 4:30. I knew she had finished because she looked at me with an expression that was no longer performing anything. Not composure, not sincerity, not the careful management of impression that I had spent 22 years reading as simply the way she looked. She just looked tired, genuinely completely tired, in the way of a person who has been holding something heavy for a very long time and has finally put it down, even if putting it down means that everyone can now see what it was. I waited to make sure she was finished. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and removed a folded document. I had picked it up from Reed's office the previous afternoon. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage under California Family Code, completed and signed by me, and notarized by Reed's office administrator. It named Walter James Gaines as petitioner and Diane Marie Gaines as respondent. It cited irreconcilable differences as the grounds, which was the standard language under California's no-fault divorce statute, and which was both accurate and, under the circumstances, a considerable understatement. I unfolded it and set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it without touching it. She looked at it for a long time, long enough that I had time to look around the conference room at the whiteboard where I had written the alphabet in large, clear letters for the Wednesday evening session 2 weeks ago, and not yet erased it at the window, where the December afternoon light was going flat and gray over the staff parking lot, at the 8 chairs around the table where adults who were learning to read for the first time in their lives sat on Wednesday evenings with their workbooks open, working through something difficult with a seriousness and a patience that I had always found genuinely moving. "Your attorney will be in contact with mine," I said. "Thomas Reed on Fulton Street. You have his number." Diane looked up from the document. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying, or she was doing what she did, which was allowing herself exactly the amount that seemed appropriate without surrendering to more, except that this time it did not look calculated. This time it looked like a person sitting very still because movement might break something. "Walter?" she said. "Yes," I said. She opened her mouth and then closed it. She looked back down at the document. She pressed her fingertips against the edge of it without lifting it from the table. "The children," she said quietly. "I want you to know that whatever happened between us, whatever I did, I love them. That was never." Her voice broke on the last word genuinely and without recovery. She pressed her hand flat against the table and looked at the whiteboard with its careful alphabet until she had control of her breathing again. "I love them," she said again. "I want you to know that." I looked at her. In 22 years, I had watched Diane cry in ways that were real and in ways that were not, and I had not always been able to tell the difference. I could tell the difference now. What I was looking at now was real. "I know," I said. It was the truest thing I had said to her in 2 weeks. I walked to the door and held it open. Diane gathered her bag from the chair beside her and stood. She straightened her coat with the automatic gesture of someone returning to a public space, where how they looked would matter. She walked to the door without looking at me. In the doorway she stopped. She did not say anything. She stood for a moment with her back to me in the doorway of the conference room where adults learn to read on Wednesday evenings, and then she walked out into the corridor, I watched her move down the hallway past the staff bulletin board with its holiday schedule and its sign-up sheet for the January book drive, past the break room door, past the section of shelving I had reorganized 3 weeks ago and which still satisfied me every time I walked past it. She moved through the library the way people move through a space that is not theirs carefully, without touching anything, and pushed through the door at the end of the corridor into the main lobby. The door swung shut behind her. I stood in the doorway of the conference room and looked at the empty hallway for a moment. Then I looked back into the room at the 8 chairs, the whiteboard alphabet, the folded document still sitting on the table where I had placed it. I went back in, picked up the document, folded it again, and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I went back to the reference desk to finish the last hour of my shift. Margaret did not ask anything. She handed me a stack of returned materials to process and went back to the circulation desk, which was exactly what I would have wanted if I had been asked, and which she knew without being asked because 11 years at an adjacent desk teaches a person things that are more useful than questions. At 5:15, I called Claire. She answered on the second ring. Dad. Her voice had the particular quality it got when she already knew something was wrong and was deciding how to approach it. She was 24 years old and finishing her second year at UC Davis, and she was without question the most perceptive person I knew. I filed for divorce today, I said. I wanted you to hear it from me. A pause. Then, are you okay? Yes, I said. I'm going to be. I need to tell you some things. Not tonight. Tonight I'm going to pick up Noah from the after-school program and make dinner and watch whatever he wants to watch. But this week, can you come home for a few days? I'll be there tomorrow, she said without hesitation, without asking any of the questions she was certainly holding. I'll drive up in the morning. Thank you, I said. Dad, she said. I love you. I love you too, I said. I hung up and sat for a moment in the staff break room with my phone in my hand looking at the holiday potluck sign-up sheet on the break room wall, at the names of the people I had worked alongside for 18 years, written in their different handwritings in the columns next to the dishes they had offered to bring. Then I got up, put on my coat, and went to get Noah. Noah chose to watch a movie about a dog that gets lost and finds its way home. It was not the most sophisticated piece of cinema I had ever sat through, but it had a good dog and a satisfying ending, and Noah watched it from the couch with his head on my shoulder and his feet tucked under the blanket we kept folded over the back cushion, and by the time the credits rolled, he had fallen asleep in the specific total way that children fall asleep completely without transition. One moment present and the next simply gone. I carried him upstairs and put him to bed without waking him. I stood in the doorway of his room for a moment, the room with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that we had put up together when he was 5. The bookshelf crowded with the picture books he was growing out of, and the chapter books he was growing into, the desk in the corner where he did his homework and drew his rocket ships and conducted the serious creative business of being 7 years old. The room smelled like him, like the particular combination of soap and crayons, and something indefinably childlike that I had learned years ago to pay attention to, because it would not last forever. I pulled his door most of the way closed and went back downstairs. Claire arrived at 11:30 that night. She had driven from Davis in the dark 4 hours on the 99, and she came through the front door carrying a duffel bag and looking like someone who had spent 4 hours in a car deciding what to say and had arrived at the conclusion that most of it could wait. She set her bag down in the entryway and looked at me, and then she crossed the room and put her arms around me the way she had done since she was small, with the full and uncomplicated commitment of someone who had decided that this was what the situation required and was not going to be self-conscious about it. I held on. We stood in the entryway of the house on Ridgecrest Drive for a long moment, my daughter and I, on the night of December 24th. And I thought about the night she was born, the too-fast drive to St. Agnes, the 4 hours in the hallway the first time they let me in. And I stood at the edge of the room, not knowing what to do with my hands. 24 years ago, she had been so small. She had looked at me with the unfocused, searching gaze of a newborn, finding nothing in particular, and finding it completely acceptable. And I had understood in that moment, with a totality I had never felt about anything before, that there was nothing I would not do for this person. That had not changed. "Tell me," she said. When we finally sat down at the kitchen table with mugs of tea neither of us particularly wanted, I told her. Not everything, not that night, not in the order of its full complexity, but the shape of it, the outline. Enough that she would understand what the next months were going to require and what they were not going to require, and what I needed from her, which was not agreement or validation, but simply the presence of someone who knew the truth and was not going to pretend otherwise. She listened the way she had always listened, carefully, without interrupting, with the focused attention of someone who understood that listening was not passive. When I finished, she wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the kitchen table for a long moment. "Were you scared?" she asked. Not about the finances, not about the legal process, about whether I was scared. "Yes," I said. "For a while." She nodded. "Are you still—" I thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. "No," I said. She looked up at me. "Good," she said. And that was the end of that part of the conversation, because Claire had always known when a thing had been said completely. We sat at the kitchen table until past 1 in the morning, talking about other things. Her researched the apartment she was thinking about in Davis, whether she should get a cat. We talked about Noah and what he knew and what I planned to tell him and when. We talked about Gerald Hoffman's daughter in New York and whether I had written to her since the funeral. I had not. I said I would. At some point, the conversation became what conversations become late at night, less directed, more like two people keeping each other company in the particular darkness of a December night that was technically a holiday and was going to require some adjustment before it felt like one again. Claire fell asleep on the couch at 1:45. I put the blanket over her and turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. 9 months passed. I will not say they passed easily, because they did not. The legal process moved at the pace legal processes move, which is to say slowly and with a great deal of paperwork and a number of conversations with Thomas Reed that I came to dread, not because of what he told me, but because of the sustained low-level exhaustion of having to remain attentive to something I wished I could stop thinking about. Diane and I communicated through our attorneys for most of those 9 months. When we spoke directly, which happened rarely, we spoke about practical matters. The children's schedules, a question about the property tax, filing a piece of mail that had come to the house after she moved out. The conversations were brief and civil and had the quality of interactions between two people who had agreed without discussing it that the available energy was better spent elsewhere. She moved into an apartment in the Tower District in February, a 2-bedroom according to Claire, who had driven past it once without stopping. I did not ask for more details than that. The Wells Fargo fraud investigation concluded in March. The bank's determination was that the HELOC had been authorized through a deceptive instrument, the power of attorney obtained under misrepresentation, and that the transactions were subject to recovery proceedings. The process of recovering the funds was ongoing and complicated, and what Reed told me likely resolve partially rather than completely, which was the realistic outcome in most fraud recovery cases, and which I had accepted before he finished the sentence. Marcus Holt's notary public commission was suspended by the California Secretary of State's office in April, pending the outcome of the fraud investigation. His private notary practice, which had been his primary source of income for 11 years, effectively ceased to exist. Reed mentioned this to me in passing at one of our meetings, and I noted it and filed it in the part of my mind designated for facts that did not require a response. The petition for dissolution of marriage was granted on September 11, 2026. I was not in the courtroom. Reed represented my interests. He called me at the library at 2:15 in the afternoon to tell me it was done. I was at the reference desk. I thanked him and hung up and helped the next person in line find the large print section. Claire came home the following weekend with a car full of painting supplies. She had decided without asking me that the living room needed a new color, and she was correct. The walls had been a shade of beige since before Noah was born, a color we had chosen in the first year of the marriage because it was neutral and safe and did not commit to anything, which now seemed to me like an accurate description of several choices I had made during that period. Claire picked a color called Coastal Sage. It was a soft, quiet green with a blue undertone that changed slightly depending on the quality of the light, warmer in the morning, cooler in the afternoon. Noah helped for one enthusiastic hour before losing interest and returning to his rocket ship drawings. Claire and I painted through Saturday afternoon and into the evening, listening to the radio, talking occasionally, spending long, comfortable stretches without talking at all. On Sunday morning, I stood at the front door with my coffee and looked at the living room and thought that it was the right color. Not dramatic, not a statement. Just the color the room should have been for a while now, finally on the walls. That afternoon, I walked outside and stood at the end of the front path looking at the house. It was a Sunday in September, warm and still in the particular way of Central Valley fall days, when the summer heat has finally relented, but the air has not yet taken on the quality of winter. The jacaranda tree Noah and I had planted in the side yard 3 years ago was dropping its last purple flowers onto the grass. The porch light was on, even though it was the middle of the afternoon, because Noah had turned it on that morning while playing with the switch, and I had not yet bothered to turn it off. The house looked the way it looked. 2 stories craftsman trimmed the gabled attic window facing west. I looked at the attic window for a moment. It occurred to me, standing there with my coffee in the September afternoon, that it had been 9 months and 16 days since I had sat in a rental car on this same street, watching the light in that window go dark, and that everything I had known about my life at that moment had been wrong in ways I could not yet have described, and that everything I knew about my life at this moment was different without being entirely unrecognizable, which was perhaps the most honest thing I could say about the distance between the two. I heard the front door open behind me. Noah came down the front path in his socks. He had a persistent indifference to footwear that I had stopped fighting sometime around his 6th birthday. He came and stood beside me and looked at the house with the same attention I was giving it, as if he had decided that whatever I was doing out here was worth participating in. We stood there for a moment together. "Dad," he said. "Yeah." "Is Dad Mark ever coming back?" I had been waiting for this question for 9 months. I had thought about how to answer it for 9 months. I had consulted with a child psychologist. Reed had recommended a woman named Dr. Patricia Harmon, who had white hair and an office full of plants and a manner of discussing difficult things that made them seem discussable. She had given me language. I had thought about the language and then set most of it aside in favor of something simpler. "No," I said, "he's not part of our life anymore." Noah considered this. He was looking at the house still at the gable window, and the new color just visible through the living room curtains. "Okay," he said. He reached over and took hold of my hand, not the way small children grab hands needing to be held, but the way he had started doing it recently, more deliberate, more chosen, the gesture of a person who has decided that this is where he wants his hand to be. We stood like that for a while, the two of us at the end of the front path in the September afternoon, looking at the house where we lived. I thought about Gerald Hoffman, who had spent 40 years teaching high school history in Brooklyn, and who had said at the last dinner we had together 8 months before he died that the only history that finally mattered was the personal kind, the record of what you chose to do with the time and the people you were given. He had said it casually, the way he said most of the things that stayed with me, as though he was not aware he was saying something worth keeping. I had written to his daughter in January. She had written back. We had exchanged 3 letters since then, the old-fashioned kind on paper, and in her last letter, she had said that her father had spoken of me often and that she was glad we were in correspondence. I was glad too. I finished my coffee. The jacaranda tree had dropped the last of its flowers. The porch light was still on in the middle of the afternoon, burning for no reason, except that a 7-year-old had found the switch, which seemed to me standing there like as good a reason as any. I had spent 22 years living in a version of my own life that had been arranged for me by someone who understood long before I did that the easiest person to deceive is the one who has decided to trust you. I did not think I would make that mistake again, not because I had stopped trusting people I had not, but because I had learned at the cost that such lessons tend to cost the difference between trust that is given freely and trust that is given carelessly, and why the difference matters. I thought about what I wanted Noah to know about this when he was old enough to know it. Not the details, not the documents and the bank accounts and the photographs and the USB drive. The thing underneath all of that. The thing I had found in the parking lot on Ridgecrest Drive on a December afternoon, sitting in a rental car, watching a window, before I knew what I was looking for. That the truth is available to anyone willing to look at it directly. That looking at it directly is harder than it sounds and more necessary than most people allow, and worth whatever it costs. That a person can lose a great deal and still be standing at the end of his own front path on a Sunday afternoon in September, with his son's hand in his, looking at a house that still belongs to him. Noah tugged my hand. "Can we have grilled cheese for dinner?" he asked. I looked down at him. "With tomato soup," I said. He considered. "They're one food," he said. "Then yes," I said. "We can have one food for dinner." We went inside. This is my family story, and I wish it were the kind of family story that began and ended with other people, the kind you hear and think that could never happen to me. But I am standing here on the other side of it, and I need to tell you, honestly, it can happen to anyone who confuses loyalty with blindness. I am not a bitter man. I believe, and I say, this having lost more than I expected to lose, that God places certain seasons in our lives not to destroy us, but to show us what we were never meant to carry alone. This family story cost me 22 years of assumptions I should have examined sooner. The lesson I carry is not about suspicion, it is about attention. Pay attention to the quiet things, the folder that is not where it was, the question asked one too many times, the person who makes your gratitude feel necessary. This family betrayal did not break me, but I would not wish it on anyone. If someone in your life is showing you who they are, in small ways believe them before the evidence fills a conference table. If this family betrayal story moved you in any way, if it made you think or feel something you needed to feel, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories that stay with you long after they end, subscribe. We will be here. Thank you for staying until the very last word. And one final note, some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements constructed entirely for the purpose of reflection and education. If that is not the content you are looking for, we respect that completely. Please find what serves you best. But if you are staying, we are glad you are here.